How Easy You Are to Need by Delimeful. Chapter 3. Summer. For the next few days, Virgil drifted in and out of consciousness. His body needed rest badly, especially when it was so injured, but fear wouldn't let him forget where he was, keeping an iron grip on his mind. He was restless, waking periodically to check his surroundings, make sure they hadn't grown tired of his stubbornness enough to cage him yet. For the first day, he only saw Roman and Logan for brief spurts of time, but upon the next morning Patton had returned to his spot on the plush armchair with no explanation. It was as though he had never been held hostage at all, and whenever he caught Virgil's gaze on him, and he somehow always caught him, he would offer the shifter a bright smile, one he could see no lie in. He never responded, but Patton didn't seem to take offense. He generally didn't, Virgil recalled from his nights under the floorboards, but he certainly hadn't thought the courtesy of forgiveness would be extended to him. That was the strangest part, the casual acceptance, and the most difficult to figure out. The three of them would eat their meals in the living space, settled onto the floor or the chairs around the couch, conversation as easy as if there wasn't a monster laid out 3 feet away from them. He was their fourth mute roommate, watching them with narrowed eyes when they weren't looking, and ignoring all subtle and not-so-subtle attempts to draw him into conversation. It was hard. He'd spent ages wondering what it would be like to be up there with them, human and safe and pack. It was just an impossible dream, but sitting here, in the room with them, made something in him yearn to reach out, let himself be tricked into false comforts. He struggled to repress it because, well, if he was going to die, he might as well take advantage of their pitying kindness, right? Still, he managed. A kernel of bitterness was shored up in his throat, a reminder of what was to come. A reminder that this was as cruel a death as any, maybe crueler than letting him die from his wounds. At least that would have been quick and easy. He was pretty sure the humans weren't being intentionally cruel. They couldn't have known how attached he'd gotten, how badly it would hurt to be faced with their larger-than-life presence directly and still know how the story would end. Still know that they were trying to catch him off guard, make him shift so they could kill him and take his pelt. No matter how many times he told himself that it was for the best, that he understood why they were doing it, that he was a risk to their safety, that kernel of bitterness remained lodged there, a sound like the smallest voice wishing things were different. It wasn't fair, but neither was life. So it went. With that dreary mindset driving him deeper into hopelessness, it was no wonder he caved when he did. It was Patton that ultimately got him, which he could have predicted. He woke up as soon as his mind registered something moving around him, and instinctively snarled, flashing his teeth, still considerably sharp in human form, and jolting upright to take in his surroundings. The soft human was frozen in surprise, the edges of a knitted blanket in his hands. It had already been on his lap when he started drifting off earlier in the night, so it seemed Patton had simply been trying to pull it up to cover more of him. Virgil recoiled back into himself immediately, scanning the dark room for other humans with regret swelling at his throat. Stupid, stupid. He knew better than to snap at one of them. He was going to get himself tortured. "I'm so sorry," Patton whispered, mindful of the quiet atmosphere around them. Virgil stopped short, confused, and watched as the human flapped his hands around like errant moths, always stopping short of touching him. "I didn't mean to wake you up. I should have thought before I— Oh, gee, I'm sorry, kiddo." "What?" Virgil said hoarsely, too loud in the stillness of the night. And then before his mind could catch up, "Why aren't you scared of me?" Patton initially looked delighted at his voice, but then he registered the words, and his hands dropped slightly, an uncertain look crossing his face. "Afraid of you? Kiddo—" "I'm not a child," Virgil snapped, voice low but distinctly laced with a defensive growl. "I threatened your life a couple of days ago. You shouldn't be treating me like this. Like a house guest. Like someone he cared about." "Mr. Wolf," Patton said seriously, "you saved my life just a few days ago. Don't you remember? If it wasn't for you, I'd have come away with much worse than a scratch. It wouldn't be very nice of me to treat you badly, now would it?" Virgil blinked, thrown. Was that a pun? Patton grinned, all soft edges and rounded teeth, and his hands flitted over to Virgil's side. The shifter tensed, but all that happened was those hands tucking the blanket back against him gently, and retreating as swiftly as they came. The human gave him a thumbs up, and when he simply stared back, bewildered, Patton whispered a "good night," before vanishing from the room as well. The complete lack of fear from the man was astounding. First Logan, now Patton as well? Was he losing his edge or something? Did they somehow not realize he was a dangerous monster? He was left alone with his racing thoughts, and by the time morning light broke through the window, he believed he had it figured out. The kindness, the care, the lack of blood or skin harvesting, it wasn't a trick to lower his guard. It was a form of gratitude for saving one of their small pack. The humans couldn't afford to let him live, but they didn't want to leave such a life debt unpaid either. Making his last few weeks comfortable was as close to a compromise as they could manage. The bitter colonel softened slightly, the ache in his chest soothed by the hope that he'd get a taste of real pack living after all. It wouldn't all be fake. He could let himself accept this. His concession felt worth it when he got to see Roman's face, dumbstruck as he began to shoot back the nicknames he'd been building a repertoire of all this time. Patton didn't mention their late-night encounter, but he did slip him a sugar cookie. It was sweet and soft in his mouth. They took his sudden willingness to speak to them in stride, and before long they were laying it on thick, asking his thoughts and opinions on all sorts of things. He was still quiet most of the time, fatigue draining his energy, but they didn't seem to mind. There was a space for him in their conversations, one he hadn't noticed before. Naturally, it was in one of these comfortable conversations that he slipped up. It was a conversation about the stars, one where they made a game of remembering which hero went to each tale. Logan was banned, of course, from doing anything but offering obscure hints, since he was the one who told the stories in the first place. Roman and Patton went back and forth, racing to remember this or that name, until Logan described a specific myth that had them both stumped. They were bringing up and discarding all sorts of options, and Virgil felt a stirring of familiarity, the tip of his tongue poking out of his mouth as he focused on just recalling Andromeda. Virgil muttered to himself, pleased that he'd managed to remember the name of one of his favorite constellations. That's correct, Logan said, and he looked up, startled to find the three humans looking at him. I didn't know you pursued knowledge about the stars. Dark and gloomy, you could have been playing properly with us this whole time? Roman cried, aghast. It was just a coincidence. I don't know anything about stars. Virgil hurried to correct them, and then followed it up with, I just overheard Logan mention it. Coincidence. The humans all went still for a moment, like a hunter spotting prey, and Virgil felt the first stirrings of panic in his chest as Logan adjusted his glasses. Falsehood. I have not had time to regale anyone with the mythology behind Greek constellations since the bear attack. I assume you heard me outdoors at some point prior to that, then? Virgil gave his guilt away by stiffening up, teeth clenching and adrenaline coursing through him, but his racing thoughts were promptly interrupted by Logan turning his head to Roman, smug. Pay up. Roman groaned loudly, and Virgil snapped his head to the side to watch as he forked over a handful of cash. Huh? Sorry, Mr. Wolf, Patton said, sheepish as he passed over his own currency. We've sort of been maybe trying to figure you out a little, and Logan put his money on you hanging around us for a while before the bear incident. That hadn't been what he'd expected. What did Roman bet on? I completely reasonably guessed that you were the bear's destined rival, and you were so sulky for the first few days because you desperately wanted to get back to your passionate battle of broken bonds, Roman defended with wide gestures for emphasis. I never seen that bear before in my life. A startled laugh escaped him without his input, and Roman flushed pink. Hey! Virgil turned to Patton, raising an eyebrow in silent question. My guardian angel, Patton informed him brightly, then paused. Or guardian wolf, I guess? Either way, the point is, you were heaven sent in my time of need. Not likely. Now Virgil was the one blushing, and Roman snorted with laughter at his expense. Logan stood, drawing attention to himself. My theory was based on significant circumstantial evidence, including the markings you left near our cabin, the familiarity you have shown with us and our peculiarities, as well as Patton and Roman's feelings of being watched. Virgil winced at that last one. Guess he wasn't as subtle as he thought. Roman complained about not sharing vital evidence with the rest of the class, and Logan steadfastly ignored him. Whatever your reasoning, Logan continued, I wish to thank you properly for saving Patton and helping us. You didn't have to, and it came at a great cost to you." The other two humans quieted, looking to him with their strange expressions. Pity? Gratitude? Expectation? He couldn't make it out, especially not as flustered as he was at that moment. What was he supposed to say to a heartfelt thank you like that? Totally no problem? Of course it had been a problem. Patton could have died, and also now he was stuck here till he was killed. The silence was dragging on too long. Shit, just say something. "Yeah, sure," he finally choked out, eyes darting everywhere but their faces. They shared small smiles with each other, returning to their game without mocking him or being irritated with his inability to behave normally. He felt a swell of that heart-squeezing affection again, and before he could talk himself out of it, he spoke. "Virgil." They all looked over, and Roman spoke first, a little confused. "I'm pretty sure this one is Gemini, J. Delightful." "No, I'm Virgil." He averted his gaze as Patton's eyes grew round as saucers. "I know all your names, so it only seems fair." "It's lovely to finally meet you, Virgil," Logan said, and the other two took the opportunity to add their own greetings, trying his name out on their tongues with glee. It was the first time he'd ever shared his name with a human. Somehow, he couldn't find it in himself to regret it.